Okay.
Having some nerve problems.
So this is the audience. Okay, ready. Okay. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines equality as a quality or state of being equal. In today's society, we use words like equality to describe the treatment of others, but we do not truly live up to this standard. As a young woman seeking higher education, I have witnessed many times the disadvantages fellow young women experience within educational settings. Whether it's subtle or blatant, gender equality in education is a problem that can transcend into professional careers, and therefore it must be solved. Gender inequality in education can be seen globally through school policy and curriculum that have been formulated to accommodate cultural patriarchal views. This stifling of opportunity is not only unjust, but it's socially unacceptable. In this speech, we will discuss the different ways women are negatively impacted in educational settings, counter the argument gender inequality is not common, and finally discuss a way we can positively impact the way women are treated throughout their educational careers. To begin, let us start with policies enforced in some schools around the world. According to UNESCO, girls are grossly less likely to set foot in educational facilities than boys. Despite our best efforts to fight for gender equality, we are still lacking in many ways. Seeing as education is a platform that boosts one into the professional world, attaining a high level of education is important for the success of individuals and society as a whole. However, with women having percentages as high as 60% lacking more than a secondary education in certain areas of the world, it makes it very hard for them to reach these professional goals. How is it that these rates are so high? It's the policy and the curricula that are based on social practices. As reported by UNESCO, young girls and women in sub-Saharan Africa report rates as high as 56% being out of school. There are many reasons, but first we must look at it culturally. As stated in an article by the UN in 2016, poor families are forced to send boys to school while keeping girls at home and helping with chores in the belief that chores are sufficient lessons for girls to learn how to keep a family. Even as more girls are enrolled in primary schools, their chances of dropping out continue to be greater than boys. The notion that women must lead domestic lives is a gender stereotype that has been encouraged many times over and practiced heavily. While one may like to believe it's an outdated practice, we're still seeing its effects today. In addition to cultural practices, school policies can also cause issues that hinder the education process in young women's lives. The most common school policy that has been linked with targeted gender bias is dress code. While the purpose of dress code is to establish a sense of professionalism in educational settings, more often than not, it does the opposite. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, in the United States, nearly 53% of public schools enforce a strict dress code. Moreover, the punishment associated with these dress codes include missing class or suspension. Who receives the brunt of these punishments? Girls. Why, might you ask? Dress code policies like the fingertip length rule for skirts and anti-shoulder exposure rules for tops are specifically targeted towards girls. Imagine being asked to leave class because your skirt was half an inch too short. Not only does the punishment not suit the crime, it detracts from women's educational experience. Instead of being in class and learning and bettering themselves, women all over the country find themselves out of class serving punishments for their minor wardrobe infractions, thus creating a cloud of confusion regarding dress code and also creating a negative undertone surrounding it. While the evidence of gender equality in educational is minimal, while opponents may argue that the evidence of gender equality in education is minimal, this could not be further from the truth. Many could argue that gender inequality is not as omnipresent as it is in other aspects of life. However, since education is a stepping stone for other realms of life and adulthood, any presence of gender inequality would be detrimental to the success of those negatively afflicted. In fact, in a research paper done by Columbia University, it is highlighted that teaching environments in which stereotypical gender norms are encouraged, women perform less in critical thinking courses such as math and science. The lack of stimulation and encouragement creates an anxiety that lowers performance and ultimately lowers test scores. When women are encouraged, these scores drastically improve. Despite males' biological computation prowess, women can succeed equally when given the right tools. One could also argue that these gender gaps in our education occur mainly in third world countries and it's not a first world nation issue. While statistics show gender gaps are prominent in poor nations due to low socioeconomic status, it can also be seen in nations like the United States. In the US, it's most common for the gender gap to be seen in higher education. In an article done by the state press, women make over 66% of the education field, but do not hold positions of higher power in high education in the same way, reporting a low 27%, thus highlighting the patriarchal views associated with male leadership being in dominant positions of power and showing that it can occur within wealthy nations. Lastly, it can be argued that school dress code policies are beneficial. While I agree with the overall premise of them, they are and that they do encourage professionalism. These new additions to dress code policy are not only confusing, they also highlight the sexualization of young women's bodies. A poll survey done by Today.com states that 89% of those surveyed agree that new dress code policies are extremely confusing and could use clarification. What used to be straightforward has now become blurred and difficult to appropriately implement. By encouraging young women to cover their distressed holes in their jeans with paper or cover their shoulders to avoid punishment, reaffirms the notion that conservative behavior of women is what is correct and should therefore be implemented at all times, thus negatively impacting self-image and forcing typical gender norms. While we acknowledge the views of the others, we must not lose sight of the goal at hand, and that goal is to solve this problem. In order to combat this problem, we must acknowledge that it exists. Many don't see gender equality as a real issue, thus making it a hard problem to solve. Moreover, gender gaps are deeply ingrained in social norms and customs. Therefore, it would be very hard to completely get rid of. But acknowledgement is the first step. Additionally, in countries in which socioeconomic status is an important factor contributing to this gap, we can donate resources to encourage academic growth. Great examples are missionary work, foreign exchange programs, STEM programs, etc. All of these offer a semblance of education that can put these young women closer to their goals. Overall, it is up to us to maintain an active tone. That way we can combat this problem. To conclude, gender inequality in education is an important issue that affects women on a global scale. Whether it is social beliefs or school policies, women are hindered and marginalized throughout the majority of their educational career. It is up to us to make the difference. We must not only acknowledge that this problem exists, we must also aid in ceasing the problem by offering educational resources to those in need. Merriam-Webster has their own definition for what equality is, but I have my own. As a young woman who desires education, mine is to attain it free of hindrance. We define our futures, so fight for it and make the most of it. Thank you.